Welcome to Soul Elevation, guiding your ascension to new heights. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin. It was a wonderful honor to host Rupert Isaacson in this episode, where we talk about his family's healing journey with autism and the role of shamanic intervention and the animal kingdom, particularly horses. You'll hear me say this in the recording, but you really must read The Horse Boy. It's powerful, magical, and deeply touching. Rupert Isaacson is a best-selling author, filmmaker, and humanitarian known for his groundbreaking work in autism and healing. He's the author of the international bestseller The Horse Boy, which chronicles the extraordinary journey he took with his autistic son across Mongolia in search of healing through horses and shamanic traditions. The story became an award-winning documentary and sparked a global movement. Rupert later founded the Horse Boy Foundation, which supports families affected by autism and neurodevelopmental challenges through horse-based and nature-based programs. He's also the author of The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land, continuing his exploration of indigenous wisdom, healing, and the profound connection between humans, animals, and nature. So we'll begin very shortly, but first, I want to invite you to explore everything available for you at karagoodwin.com. Be sure to get my book, Your Authentic Awakening, to support your spiritual journey. You'll also find a selection of free guided meditations to strengthen your spiritual side. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you for supporting the show. Your likes, comments, shares, and subscriptions genuinely help this work reach more people. When you engage, you help uplift the frequency of the content and make it easier for others to find these conversations. So go ahead and hit the like button while you're thinking about it. All right, let's begin. Enjoy this episode. Well, welcome, Rupert. Thank you so much for coming on Soul Elevation. I'm really excited for this conversation today.
Thank you for having me on.
I was deeply moved by your book, The Horse Boy, and I hope that everybody listening reads it. Go and listen or read The Horse Boy. You will love it. It's amazing. I attest that the audio version which is read by you, is excellent. That's an excellent way to listen to this to get the book. And as I was preparing for our talk, there were so many different places I wanted to take this conversation. And so I've tried to whittle it down as best as I can, but we'll just have to see how we get on and trust that the right information is going to find its way into the conversation. Even before we started recording, we were going into the Middle Earth and all kinds of fun things. So I can't wait to see what shows up today. But the book focuses on the extraordinary story of you taking your autistic son across outer Mongolia in search of healing and the amazing shamanic experiences that your family had. So, where did the inspiration for that journey come from?
Okay. In my world, in Rupert world, it was a very logical thing, and I'll tell you why. So my family heritage is African. My mother is from South Africa. My father is from Zimbabwe, and I was born and raised in England, but I had a sort of a Southern African bubble upbringing, and there was a lot of back and forth to Africa. And as soon as I was old enough to travel independently, I was backpacking around down there. And then that led to me being a journalist down there and a human rights advocate. And I became a human rights advocate for a group of people who people tend to know as the Bushmen, or the Khoisan, or the San Bushmen. They are hunter-gatherer groups who live in an area called the Kalahari, which huge area goes across 5 countries in southern Africa, the dry heartland. And they are the oldest culture that is known still existing on the planet. Everybody, you and me, everybody listening, has a DNA that goes back, a common DNA, 60,000 years. They've identified this DNA to a female, a woman, living at the time in what is now Botswana. The people who were living there, they call this woman Eve, and the people who were living there at that time are the people who are still living there. And the wonderful thing about that culture is that they are completely a culture of conflict resolution. Hunting and gathering cultures tend to be, they tend not to make war. They tend to have gender equality. They tend to have all of these things because all of these things actually make for a relatively conflict-free life, which when you are the middle of the food chain, out there with just bows and arrows, with large predators out there, you need to make sure that your group does not fragment. So if conflict gets beyond a certain point, everyone is going to get eaten by hyenas. So the way that this is, they have many, many ways of making sure that people don't bully each other and things. But at the core of it, there's a shamanic experience which happens usually about every 10 days, which could be for healing, i.e., let's say you've got some physical condition or some emotional thing going on. It could be called for that, but it could just as equally be called for just a kind of checking in on everybody and washing the psychic dirty laundry of the group to make sure that everyone's cooled out. And it's really effective. These people have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and they will probably be around after civilization falls. Um, they are the blueprint for what it means to be a human being. So I spent a lot of time with these people, and I experienced a lot of shamanic healing, and I saw a lot of shamanic healing. So I saw people healed from cancers. I saw people having depressions and psychosis is pulled out of their bodies, and literally the healer like bleeding from the eyes and bleeding from the nose and vomiting and getting rid of this stuff, and the person being kind of okay. And this technology, this spiritual technology, is a real thing. Whatever people might think, oh well, it's all rubbish, isn't it? Well, if it was all rubbish, they'd all be dead, because they get sick like anybody else does, and they get bitten by snakes, and they, have accidents and go nuts, and all the same things that happen to the rest of us. But yet there they are, days walk, many, many days walk from Western medicine, and this works. Okay. So naturally, when my son was diagnosed with very severe autism, it was natural for me to think, well, okay, I could look for a solution perhaps down there, or part of the solution down there. But my son had also had this incredibly positive, revolutionary experience, going from effectively nonverbal to effectively verbal while sitting in the saddle in front of me on my neighbour's quarter horse mare, Betsy. I happen to be a lifelong horseman. I'm sitting here on my horse farm. I've just come in from the ram pen with my horses. That's my life. That's my culture. And so Africa, that particular part of Africa, it's not a horse culture. So it was natural for me to think, where is there a place on the planet that combines that type of healing with horses? Mongolia, gut feeling, gotta go. So like I say, in my world, that was a very logical decision. It wasn't even an inspiration. It was like, that plus that equals that. Let's go. So we did. And but by the time we went out there, we were a few years into the autism adventure. And I had lost my desire for my son to not be autistic. Every special needs parent goes through a grieving process where you wish for things to be other than they are for a bit. And then after a while, you start noticing that there are great gifts in this, even if they're hard won and painful. And you realize that actually you've been shown a side of life that is much, much more beautiful, and that you need to have the guts to kind of go forward with this. But this is difficult in isolation. So we're going to return to this subject of community and tribe and so on in a moment. So I had gone through that. So it meant that by the time I went out and we were now seeking out shamans and healers there, I wasn't hoping that they would make my son not autistic. I was very much not just at peace with the autism, I was embracing it. I could now see that there are great, great gifts associated with it. But I did want my son to not be suffering. And I wanted my son to be able to do things like use the toilet and communicate more easily, and be able to swim in the shark-infested waters of neurotypical humanity, because he's vulnerable. These people are vulnerable. So, and we're all vulnerable, but these people are particularly vulnerable. So by the time I went out, I was, I had to ask myself, what am I going to do if nothing happens? And I thought, well, really, that's all right, because uh, there's no way nothing's going to happen, because when you take a pilgrimage like that, a journey like that, a spiritual undertaking like that, there's always going to be change of some sort. But even if there's nothing in the tangible that happens, at least the diagnosis of autism in our family did not prevent us from kind of going and having this extraordinary and amazing adventure together. In fact, it caused us to go and have this extraordinary, amazing event. And that alone, honestly, would have been enough. But in the event, there was great change. And yeah. And so we wrote a book about it and made a film about it. Yeah.
Yes. It's amazing. My friend recommended it, and I downloaded it, and I took a walk with my dog, and I think I listened to like an hour of it on a walk with my dog. I cried 3 times. Just the first, I don't even know if it was a full hour. So the report back when I got back from my walk is, "Okay, Laura, I started this book," because she told me a couple of times, "You will love this book. Get this book." And I'd forgotten the first time, and then the second time I was like, and horses were everywhere for me, and I was like, "Okay, I'm really paying attention right now." And I was like, "Yeah, you nailed it. I've already cried 3 times." And I was, out in public walking around like, "Oh my god," when he gets on Betsy the first time. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so moving. The whole book is just deeply moving. Um, but you talked about the gifts that were in there,
Yeah.
and that leads to one of the really powerful, just one of the really powerful parts of the story is the response of the animals to Rowan, your
Yeah.
son. They treated him with extreme reverence, and then you contrast that with the way that human society, you have all of these glaring contrasts of how society responds to him, because
Yeah.
he has a lot of tantrums, and they're very loud, and they're very, you do a great job of explaining, of really kind of getting all the senses going of what it's like when he gets into one of his tantrums, and what that's like for you as a parent, on kind of on both sides of, okay, I understand what's going on with my son. I also am part of society. Like, I understand, but I also, these people don't understand what's going on. And so they're reacting in a way that's not
Mhm.
compassionate.
And one has
But
to have compassion for those people, because the thing is, you don't know what fires they have to put out. It's sometimes they're just being flat out a-holes, but other times, they can be triggered because of past pain and past experiences that, you don't know what fires those people are putting out. So one does, at the same time, even when they're being not pleasant to your kid, have to have some sort of compassion for them. So it is a good exercise in compassion, if a
yeah.
painful one.
Yes, lots of opportunities for that. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the reverence of the animals, and what you make of that, and then also what you made of it in that striking contrast as well?
Yeah, I mean, I now, as you probably know, run something called the Horseboy Foundation, and so we stumbled through this story into actually understanding the neuroscience of why it was working when he got on Betsy, and then realizing, we could talk about that in a moment, and then how you could reproduce that and replicate that for other people and other children. So we did start doing that relatively quickly, and now we have an organization that trains people how to do it, both with horses and without, an equine assisted therapy and something called movement method. It's about how certain types of movement affect the nervous system and the brain. Okay. Um, there's still a spiritual element to it, but there's also a scientific element to it. These two things always go in parallel. They are never in opposition to each other. It's often presented as if science and spirituality are in opposition, but nobody sane believes that, especially good scientists.
Mm.
So the reverence that you talk about isn't reverence in the kind of Lion King, hold the child up, and all the animals rear up, bow down or whatever. It's more kind of just a recognition of vulnerability within the mammalian caregiving system, where the particularly female, Betsy was a mare, mammals of most species, predator and prey species, will respond to vulnerability,
Mm.
particularly in a human juvenile, but actually often in human adults as well. So there's a lot of therapies where, I mean, we serve adults in our organization as well. And somebody comes in with obvious vulnerability, my horses will absolutely modify their behavior and change the rules for that person and step in. So will my dogs, so will my cat, so will I.
Mm.
We are, the compassion runs beyond the human. And the fields of consciousness, if you think of that, which sounds so woo woo, but let's talk about who actually talks about fields of consciousness. Physicists like Roger Penrose, physicists like Rupert Sheldrake. You want to see if you can get those guys on your show. These are the people who were responsible for looking at things like early string theory and uh, all sorts of things that have become somewhat mainstream. They were outliers at the time. They were the first people to talk about a conscious universe. And what they mean by that is, if, say, we think of the ocean, and you look at the ocean, you see a wave. You think, that's a wave. I'm a surfer, maybe, and I want to ride that wave. So my attention goes to that wave. But I know that that wave is part of the ocean. And I know that when that wave breaks on the shore, it goes back to the ocean. And that outside, beyond where the breakers are, there's a different type of ocean. And then there's also, it's evaporating, it's becoming rain, it's becoming clouds, but it's all the same thing, right? So it's easy to understand that certain types of matter within those water molecules can come together and produce something that looks like a wave, or come together and looks like something that looks like rain, or something that looks like steam, or something that looks like ice, but it's actually all the same thing. And each one can transmute back to the other one. If we accept that in that context, then presumably that's every context. So you and I, we're composed of these minerals, stardust, and all this stuff. When we come together, the molecules come together and produce you, or this teacup, or this cell phone. But they will then go back and coalesce into the wider whole and then regroup into something else later on. We know this. So where does consciousness come into this? Well, if it used to be thought that consciousness was, I think it still is thought by some people, is a product of the human brain. There is the human brain, and it creates this thing called consciousness. And that really comes out of a 17th century sort of Enlightenment philosopher, Rene Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am. And he was reacting to the extreme brutality of the age. Because when the Reformation came in and people rejected Catholicism as superstition and blah blah blah, what happened but a massive pushback from Catholicism and the Spanish Inquisition, religious wars, and all sorts of. I'm talking within the Western sphere, Western history. So then, of course, the 17th century comes around, and it just gets even bigger because it gets fueled by money from the New World that's coming in. So the wars can now kill everybody, and of course they do. And Rene Descartes, I think, found himself caught up in this, and he served for a while, I think, as a pikeman in the French Protestant force. Someone will correct me in the comments below. I might have got it backwards, but anyway, he's caught up in this, and at the same time, science is really coming in, challenging all of this. And it's a time of great turbulence. And so he goes on to an extreme where he just wants to reject superstition. And so he says, no, it's all about the mind, it's all about the intellect, it's all about matter. Unfortunately, this led to some people taking an almost religious attitude to his Cartesian way of thinking, to say, oh, well, now animals don't have souls, animals don't have emotions. A tree is not conscious because it's, and this gets tied up with Christianity, only humans have souls, and blah, 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 blah. But everybody deep down knows it's wrong. And anybody, observing a dog being kicked and yelping knows, well, that has certainly got an emotion. Or observing that you're sad and coming and putting its paw on your lap, or observing how they interact with each other, you'd have to be willfully self-blinding, to not say, oh yeah, they have emotion, they have consciousness. They are conscious of me, they're conscious of each other. Therefore, if they are, presumably kind of everything else is. But the way in which that might happen might be different. So then you jump forward and you go to, say, someone like Nikola Tesla, who says, no, we've got 200 years, whoop, and end of the Industrial Revolution. And Nikola Tesla says, look, if you want to understand the universe, you have to think in terms of frequency and vibration, and the fact that molecules are vibrating around each other, sometimes greater distances, sometimes more distance. This is what electricity is. None of us can actually say what it is, but we all experience it. That's life force, blah, 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 blah. And he learns to harness this kind of thing. But he's very, very clear that there's a universal consciousness, a universal frequency. And he's very, very clear, as everybody has been since the Bushmen, with any common sense, that the whole thing is love. So when these animals, this is a very long-winded, I'm sorry, the answer is so long-winded.
No, it's fascinating. Don't be sorry.
When these animals are responding to Rowan in the way that you see them do it in the film, because we filmed all of this as well. It's not just you have to read this book and take my word for it that these things happen. You definitely see Betsy, other horses, other animals responding to Rowan in this way. It's love. They are actually responding with compassion. And that is very humbling as a human, to watch a goat respond, or a reindeer, with more compassion than your own species. Take
Yeah.
note. You're like, I'm
Right.
getting a lesson here. I'm getting a lesson here. We
Yeah.
cannot be taught by animals. Yes, we can, because animals are part of the greater consciousness. So does it matter whether I'm taught by the wave, the rain, the ice, the steam? I'm taught by water. We're mostly water. Water carries memory, blah, 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 blah. So why would I not be taught by animals? Why would I not learn from any part of the field of collective consciousness? It would be against all logic, really, and actually against all science to do otherwise. So I think that's what you're observing. It's just that we drew people's attention to it in a particularly focused way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so beautiful, and there are indications of it tea. There are indications of it throughout the book because there's the chewing, would you say? Like, with the
Licking and
lips that
chewing.
yeah,
A lot
with
of
the
horses do
horse and
that.
the lowering of the head.
Yeah. Sometimes
Yeah.
I know we get the reverence from, because yes, Betsy was bowing her head to Rowan and licking and chewing, and that is a submission gesture. But
Mm,
it's also an acceptance gesture. It's somewhere between all of those. It's
mm.
saying that I'm not going to boss you. I'm actually going to let you influence me. And if you think about that, like, think about a good adult with a kid, a good adult human, they would do the same thing, wouldn't they? They'd say, let me listen to you.
Mm.
Maybe the head would go down.
Yeah.
Maybe the eye would close a bit. Okay, deep listening. Okay, now tell me what it is you need. You know, it actually goes species to species, this kind of gesture. And the licking and chewing in horses is always about the processing of information when
Mhm.
horses lick and chew. By the way, so is farting, and so is pooing sometimes in certain
Is that
situations.
right?
It is. And so is it with humans. I always have to lower the tone. People me. It always that's why you get some of your best ideas on the loop. Because you get rid of, the toxic stuff, and you have like a little epiphany. And so, but horses do it too. Like in horse training, if the horse lets one go, and then it follows with, if it's squitty and diarrhea, they're in stress, and you want to watch out. And if it's looking good and sort of good solid British stools, then things are okay. But either way, they're processing information. They're processing it. It's all about
Wow.
processing. Yeah. Because here's another thing: with taurine structures. I don't know if you're familiar with what that means. A
Like the
taurine structure.
toroidal field?
Correct.
Okay.
So a human, most organisms are taurine, not all, but most. So we are around a gut. It goes lips to a-holes. That's what makes hot dogs, by the way. And unless they're vegan. And then everything else builds around it.
Okay.
in a sort of a sphere shape or a eggy sort of a shape. And then you might put legs and limbs on that and a tail and a head. But a horse, a human, an earthworm, we're all taurine structures. And the first thing, of course, that develops in the womb is the gut. It's often not known this, not the brain, not the
Mhm.
skeleton,
Yeah, I
not
thought I'd heard the brain,
no,
but
not the heart.
okay.
It's the gut, and
Hmm.
it's composed of neurons, as is the heart, and as is the brain. So your gut feelings, your heart feelings, are equal
Mm.
to your intellect, if not more, because they came first. So if you
Hmm.
isolate yourself from them and just we think we're this kind of brain floating about with a pair of legs attached to it, naturally we tend to make decisions that are a little bit limited because we're ignoring the other two things, intuition and heart. But that's another thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, no, we're taurine structures. We have this endocrine system of emotion, and we share it with the common consciousness field. And what a wonderful thing that is, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing because the story with Betsy, it kind of starts with Betsy in terms of
Mm,
the magic that's starting to happen around Rowan and in his journey. But I think he was only like 4 years old or something, right?
less,
So
less. Yeah, he was
less.
barely
So
3.
yeah. So not only is I mean, just the sensitivity, of course, horses are notoriously sensitive, but usually, in a very skittish way. They're very in my opinion, my experience, you wanna watch yourself around horse I love horses so much.
Yes, you do.
When I What's that?
You do. Yeah. Well, they weigh what a truck weighs, and they solve their
Right.
problems by running away. So you don't want to be in the way of that. No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and kicking sometimes, and
Yep.
when I lived in England, in the early 2000s, I would go off on hacks in the countryside and helped
So you
out at this
rode.
little horse. Yes,
Yeah.
and, not competitively, but, regularly, and helped out at a
By the
horse
way, for
farm,
the
and
American viewers and listeners, a hack in England is a trail ride. We call it hacking. I really don't know why. It sounds like we're going right with the machetes through the jungle. We're not. It means a quiet ride in the countryside, a trail ride.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. But, I have experience around horses and was comfortable around them, but also, cautious and
Right.
understand that they're very skittish, they can be spooked really easily, and they're so instinctual that they won't necessarily think before they respond, before they react. But so then to have this toddler pretty much, with when Rowan was a toddler, and then him having autism on top of it, so the behaviors that were different from a neurotypical person. But the horse, I just found it was magical. The story is magical, and it happened
It
over and
truly
over
was.
with Betsy and with other horses.
Exactly. And I think that this is the thing between science and spirituality. Magic is real.
Mhm.
If this Zoom thing that we're looking, if we showed somebody from 100 years ago this, they go, "Oh my gosh, that's magic." Even and when I say
Yeah.
100, I mean even from the 1920s, they might go, "That's a step of technology." Even with silent movies, even with that seems magical. If we went back 100 years before that, definitely 1825, yeah, 1725, you're getting into the where they might have actually tied you to a stake, for
Yeah.
and yet it's very real.
Mhm.
Um, so just because magic can have a scientific basis doesn't mean it's no less real and doesn't mean it's any less magical. So, and this is what's so interesting about shamanism is it appears to be completely irrational, shape shifting, people turning themselves into animals. I can tell you that that is a real thing. It's not American Werewolf in London, if you ever saw that movie, where the
Mm.
person becomes hairy and the teeth come out and it's not like that. But there is a way that people can go into the consciousness of an animal. And this is very much a real thing in hunting and gathering cultures. And you can even experience it in a smaller way when you are working with animals directly, even people who hunt, people who farm, it's actually about empathy, but
Mhm.
it can be taken to a level where you can effectively go inside the nervous system and they can go inside yours. We know that telepathy is a real thing. What is that but empathy? simile. And there is science behind all of this. So, but it's no less miraculous when it's going on because it's so other from the normality of experience, even for me. So when I was observing Betsy modifying her behavior, and then, as you say, other animals and horses, it was no less magical to me every time, no less miraculous. And I had actually been keeping Rowan away from horses because I thought he wasn't safe around them. It was him making his own relationship with Betsy and me following it that was the story, not me coming up with the idea because I'm this clever dad. I actually wasn't this clever dad. I didn't think my son should be around horses because, in my experience with sport horses, I trained jumpers and things. Those horses, as you say, they're very reactive, they're very skittish. I thought, he'd spook him and he'd get hurt. But no, quite the opposite, actually. So I got a real education in horses from my son's interaction with horses and from the horses themselves. And really, up until that point, I'd been very much like, I'm a trainer, I ride horses, I tell horses what to do, and da 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 da. I completely flip that on its head. And it's like, no, 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 I listen. I listen. Doesn't mean I don't want to influence, doesn't mean I don't want to have a partnership, doesn't mean I don't want to have agency. And sometimes I want to be the leader in that. Yeah. But that's different to being like dominating the animal, which is kind of the tradition that a lot of us grew up with.
Mm.
And it was thanks to my son's autism that really my eyes were opened for that.
Wow. There is so much magic in your world, in your book, and you've mentioned, like, the shape-shifting, that's in your
Mm,
book. There's all of the animal things. There is so much, but the shamans, the Bushmen, even the Bushmen are not really the focus. They're kind of the starting point, and, they come in throughout the Bushmen of
yes,
Africa. Um, but the shaman factor of the book
yes.
is incredible. It's so and there was even, when you brought up hunting just a
Mm.
moment ago, there I forgot about that aspect of it because you had been participated in fox hunting for a long
Oh,
time,
yeah, and I
correct? And
grew up
that
with all kinds of hunting growing up. Yeah, yeah.
right, and that was something that I was it a bushman who had said that that was something you needed to let go
Here's what
of?
happened. Yeah, it was I stopped live hunting, for sport. Because fox hunting is effectively hunting for sport. Even though you're not trying to kill the animal, you're still chasing it. Um, and I had also hunted for the pot, with a gun and all of those things as well growing up. Um, but there's nothing wrong with hunting. Hunting is part of the experience of the human experience on the planet, and it's how we relate. One of the ways in which we relate to nature, and nature relates to us. It's all about how it's done. And so when I see if you can get your head around this story. Um, this is before the whole thing happened with Horseboy. I told you I was a human rights advocate. I had to bring a delegation of Kalahari Bushmen to the USA to draw attention to their plight because they were being kicked off their land to make way for diamond mines. And it was illegal because this land was theirs, enshrined in law. And I, for various reasons, got drawn into this. And I wrote another book called The Healing Land about how I got drawn into that. And I got drawn into it because of my family, because it turns out I am related by marriage to that group of Bushmen in South Africa. Yes, I
Wow.
am. Yes, because like families in the Deep South, the families that have been in South Africa since, say, the 1700s, like mine, early 1800s, all the families are mixed. But um, unlike say in the USA, where there was tens of millions of people coming across from Europe, so people's origins and stories got kind of lost often. There was never that much those numbers of immigration in the colonial time. So if you know where your family were 100 years ago, 200 years ago now, you know exactly who they were, exactly what they did. It's all written down, and you know the story, right? So anyway, suffice to say, I'm a cousin by marriage to this group of Bushmen called the Kamani, but I find this out in the course of my journalism. They find it out and they say, okay, Rupert, you have to advocate for us because you're a tribe member, effectively. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll give it a try. You got to get us to the UN. I'm like, how on earth do I do that? Like, okay, I'll give it a go. Why not? Why not? In it for the crack, in it for the adventure. So I go out to try and raise some money, and eventually I do. And I get them to the USA. And we start in. I thought, let's if we're going to do it, let's do it. So we started in Hollywood, and I contacted Artists for Amnesty, great organization that basically harness celebrities to spotlight causes like this. So those of this dates me and ages me. We got Dave Matthews to
Oh, I love Dave
host a party.
Matthews.
Yeah, no one knows who he is anymore, but like he was like the biggest dude at that
Oh,
time,
man.
and
Oh,
you know,
I graduated from college in 2000. Gen X,
right.
we know who Dave Matthews is. Come on.
So, so Dave Matthews happened to be South African, right? He's born in South Africa. So we contacted him through Artists for Amnesty, and he said, "Yeah, absolutely. I'll throw a party for you guys. So that will bring some attention." So that was great. So we do this, and we do some Hollywoody things, and then we go to the East Coast where we do actually get to the UN and the US State Department, and we testify before Congress, Congressional Human Rights Caucus, and it does indeed move the whole situation forward. It quick spoiler alert: the Bushmen did end up winning the largest land claims in African history 2 times over through this work that we were doing and related other organizations as well. But that visibility becomes really important. Anyway, in between the two coasts of America, you've got that bit in the middle, haven't you? And when we were going through that bit in the middle, I wanted them to stay on some Indian reservations because I thought, well, look, when you get the land, then a new set of problems are going to come in. Let's go talk to some Indian tribes who are sort of dealing with that secondary, tertiary generation of, okay, now what do we do? So we stayed with the Navajo, and we are camping with the Bushmen in Canyon de Chelly, which is a really remote part of the Navajo reservation, which is a really remote part of America. So, and we're down on the canyon floor, which is the life down there is from about 100, 150 years ago. It's still very traditional. People living in hogans, not living in trailers. It's getting around on horseback. It's amazing down there, actually. And while we're down there, a medicine man comes to us and says, "Oh, I hear you guys are from Africa and doing this thing for the land. Would you like me to do a sweat lodge for you?" And I said, "Absolutely, of course, yeah." So we do, and we go through the rounds of prayers. And at the end of those prayers, he says, "Has anyone got anything else that they want to pray for?" And I said, "Yes, my son has just been diagnosed with very severe autism. I don't quite know what to do. I'm a bit lost." He said, "Okay." So we go through rounds of prayers. At the end of it, when we come out to cool down, he says, "Do you hunt?" And I said, "Well, actually, yeah, but maybe not in a way that you're familiar with." And he says, "It doesn't matter. That's not important. He just, I'm getting it loud and clear from the spirit world that you've got to stop. And it's somehow connected to your son's autism. And that's all I can tell you." I'm like, "Oh, great. Of course, that makes sense. This thing that I really love doing, because fox hunting, if you are a rider, it's the biggest adrenaline thing. It's got nothing to do with the hunt. It's all to do with the ride, because you're riding across country. You don't know where you're going to go. You have to jump anything that comes in front of you. It's incredibly exciting. I grew up with it. I love doing it. I thought, I'm being called upon to give it up. That makes sense, and it sucks, but I'll do it. I had to call a friend of mine after that, who was the head of the American Masters of Foxhounds Association. You want to think of like
Oh,
a very establishment sort of organization, because I would
right.
go through them, because I also had a job as a journalist in the equine press where I would actually go around and hunt with different hunts and have a great time doing it, and I would do it through them. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, look, this has happened, and I can't do it anymore. I just feel I need to tell you." And he went, "I always knew you'd betray us, Rupert. I always knew you're a bleep bleep hippie, and yeah, blah blah blah." And he like really went off on me. I'm like, "Dude, we've known each other for a long time. You're right, I am a bleep bleep hippie, but hey, I'm your fox hunting hippie friend." And and anyway, look, this has got nothing to do with me rejecting the culture. This is a purely personal decision based on this. And my background in Africa, and Anyway, I'm telling you. And as I'm talking to him, I'm talking it from my front porch in Texas where I was living at the time. And in Texas, there aren't actually a lot of foxes because there's a lot of coyotes, and the coyotes don't really tolerate foxes. So you don't see foxes that often. Like in England, you see foxes all the time, even in the cities, right? But in uh, in in that part of the world, they tend to get killed. So
Mm.
you notice like maybe twice a year you see one. Anyway, as I'm talking to my friend from the Masters of Fox Sound Association, out of the dark into the light of my porch from the front field comes a grey fox, and it sits down in front of me about, I don't know, 50, 60 feet, but within the circle of the light, and looks at me and starts going, and I literally take the phone and I go, "Do you hear that?" And he's like, "Is that what I think it is?" I'm like, "That's what you think it is." And he goes, "How is that happening?" It's like, "I don't know." And he
Oh,
goes, "Okay, well, maybe there's something in it, Rupert." And so yeah, that's a shamanic experience right there, and a wonderful one, a magical one, tied up at the end of the day with conflict resolution, peacemaking. I still hunt, by the way, fox hunt, but I don't do it that way anymore. It's an artificial way. A friend of mine has a pack of hounds, and we hunt each other. One of us is the quarry, and then we can make it difficult for the other one to find us, and we still have a great ride, and everyone has a good time, but no animal is hassled
wow.
unnecessarily. And so I'm very actually glad that happened. Again, through autism. All of the best things in my life really have happened through autism.
Yeah, it's amazing. So beautiful. And that also, because it's sort of the outside pre-Rowan part of life that is then influenced, it in a way influenced Rowan and Rowan influenced it. Another way that that shows up in the story is the ancestor on
Yeah.
his mom's side. And there
Yes.
was an ancestor that was also coming up with different shamans where they were saying there is a woman on the maternal side. I don't know if you want to share a little bit, but again, this was
Yeah.
like predated Rowan, but strongly influenced.
Well, all shamanism is based on ancestors, and it's an interesting thing that uh, one person's genetics is another person's ancestor, right? It's really, the language is a little bit interchangeable, but particularly with, say, the Bushmen or Mongolian shamans. This was a shaman from the horse tribes. We started with the horse tribes, and then we ended up with the reindeer people up in Siberia. There's a bit of Siberia that comes down into top of northern Mongolia, and that was where the strongest healings happened. The initial healings were down in the steppes with the horse people, and but some really extraordinary healings happened, including Rowan making his first ever friend in the middle of one of the ceremonies, and then that friend coming along with us for the rest of the journey. There was all sorts of, but yes, it was in the course of that healing that one of the shamans, there were actually 9 shamans at that particular thing, said there is an unhelpful ancestor, or at least perhaps an ancestor who's suffering still, and some of that suffering is permeating through, and it's from the mother's line, and where you have to be careful with this stuff is that's not saying it was the fault of my ex's
Yeah,
family line. That's not
of
how these
course.
things are interpreted at all.
Mm.
It's saying that for whatever reason, something can come down a genetic line that can be that could use some attention. And so we were given some rituals for that. And what the interesting thing about those rituals with real shamans is they're never like grand and theatric. They're always like weirdly mundane. It's like
Even being
drink.
whipped across your
Well, no,
back?
that was me. That was okay, fine, fine. Okay, I'll give you that one. Give you that one. What I mean is the after stuff you get told to do. It's like, well, here's this water
Oh,
that's
right.
been bless or given this energy or whatever, drink this a little bit these times of day for this length of time, give it to Rowan, this kind of do it right about when he's going to go to sleep, blah, 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 blah. And you think, well, how's that going to, but it kind of does. Because energy and attention, love, fields of consciousness, and we know, there's been many, many experiments about, for example, what you can do with water. If you say loving things to water, if you say hateful things to water, okay, we don't need to go into all those well-known experiments, but it's well documented. But yeah, you mentioned the whipping. Okay, so I didn't see that one coming at all because in that first ceremony where the drums are going and the shamans are chanting and it's all happening, and I see this shaman approaching me with a whip, and I turn to Torga, my guy, and like, he's gonna whip me, isn't he? And and I'm like, of course, it's like, of course I have to give up hunting. Of course I'm gonna get whipped, yeah. And and my guy Torga goes, he gives this nervous laugh. He goes, maybe a little bit. It's important not to cry out. Like, all right. So I sit there, and that guy just hauls off, and I get some good ones. The last one goes right across my groin, and I literally leave my body, like, and go back into my
Oh.
body. But what was so weird with that, you see, I had never experienced anything like that with the Bushman. The Bushman healers suffer for you. It's a form of compassion. I talked about people bleeding, vomiting, etc., on your behalf. They will take on the pain for you. It's a very brave thing to do because they really suffer. Here it's about a catharsis, more driving a negative thing out of you. What I could feel was a sense of catharsis, and there was no sense at all of anything abusive. There was no way that this person was doing anything other than calling upon his tradition to serve me as best he possibly could. And he just assumed, because he's living out there in Mongolia, well, you want to attend a shamanic ceremony with the horse people, this is kind of part of the deal. And it was. But if you think about, there are some shamanic ceremonies that involve certain types of ritualized suffering. The sun dance, the Lakota sun dance, would be an extreme example of that. This is nothing close to it. Or think about people that take ayahuasca in the jungle, and poop anacondas and die and see God and sometimes have an awful experience, but often then come back with a sense of great catharsis and clarity and a sense of going into something new. So it's not that those types of experience are negative necessarily at all. It all depends on the intention behind them. So, but it was hilarious, and even at the time, I'm like, okay, this will make a great story. So, but
Yeah.
we go through it. And what are you going to do? You're going to back out? You're in for a penny,
Yeah.
you're in for a pound. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't bad, but it was, yeah, there was a lot of shocks to the system. But if you think about also what you go through in terms of crisis as a family and as a human when your child is suffering, it's not the autism is not a problem. Take people like Dr. Temple Grandin, who I work with quite closely in the programs that we do. She's very autistic. When she was, if you don't know who she is, the listeners or viewers, she is a professor of animal sciences at Colorado State University, multiple bestseller, um, books on the brain, books on animal behavior, books on autism. She is very autistic. There was an HBO biopic made of her. You should watch it, with Claire Danes playing her. And when she was 3, she was nonverbal, rocking in a corner, wiping her poo on the walls. And her dad was going to put her in an institution. This is the 50s. Her mum said, no, I know there's an intellect in there. I'm going to get to it. And we basically follow Temple's advice in our programs. You could really argue that we follow the advice of Temple's mum. So I had gone to her long before we went to Mongolia and said, how does my son become you? And she had given me some really good directives about what to do, and I'd done them, which is actually how we ended up meeting Betsy, because I was following Dr. Temple Grandin's advice. That's actually in the book, but it sometimes gets a bit lost because the Mongolia stuff, really takes off in the story's narrative. But the point with that is that she, for example, Temple, found a way to get through her suffering not lack of communication, terrible sensory issues, which cause the tantrums, then lead to self-harm, feeling lost in the world, feeling floating out of your body. These are things which a lot of people with classic autism report, and those are the problems, not the autism itself. You can go on and become Temple Grandin with 10 PhDs and multiple on the New York Times bestseller list, and you're doing fine, but you're autistic. So it's the suffering that can go along with certain things. You don't have to be autistic to suffer. So it's addressing suffering. So, for example, sometimes there is a kind of thing of going through it to the other side. So what she would do, and you can actually buy these now, she would go in this kind of squeeze machine, which put this
Oh.
insane deep pressure on her. And then she would feel that would put her back in her body. She actually built one for herself based on a cattle crush because she was really enamored of cattle. And then she went on to work in the cattle industry and to make the slaughter industry less stressful for the cows going through, and devoted her life to that to a large degree. So you could say that what we went through, say, with the shaman whipping us, was not Rowan, but me and my ex, was something along those lines. And when you enter things like that, where you know that you've got to get to the top of that mountain in the heat, you're going to sweat. It's going to suck. It's going to hurt, but it's also amazing. And you wouldn't be anywhere else in the world for it. I remember there was one moment in Mongolia where we were long into the journey, and we were heading up into the Siberian bit, and with days on horseback. So sometimes you get off the horse and you walk just to kind of stretch your legs. And I've got Rowan on my shoulders, and he's digging the point of his chin into
Mm.
skull. Oh my god! And it's really hot, and I'm like, oh, it sucks. I hate it. And I'm like, nah, And then I like outside of myself, look at him and go, Rupert, hold on a second. You are walking across Mongolia with your kid, having the adventure of your life, and you are being a whiny little. And I'm like, you're right. So I said to Rowan, the chin is ouchy, but the hand would be nice. Could you put your chin on your hand? And ever since then, we have a private joke between us when things get difficult. We say, the chin is ouchy, but the hand is nice.
I love it. It's just incredible. The stories of the shamans that you worked with, the horse shamans, the reindeer shamans. One of the things that was striking is it was a reindeer shaman. The whole story of how the reindeer shaman showed up
Ghost is
and
his
they
name. Yeah, the
what was
reindeer
his
shaman.
name?
Ghost.
Yes,
What an
Ghost.
amazing name. Yeah, Ghost. But that is
Right,
his
and the
name.
way that you even came across him, I mean, everybody, again, you have to engage with this story. It's just phenomenal. But but Ghost talks about he wants to know about the African Bushmen
Yeah.
because he understands that he says they are they're known as the most powerful shamans. And this is coming from somebody who is exceptionally powerful and gifted in the shaman ways. So
Also living in complete isolation. So how does he know
true.
about the Bushmen, right? He's sitting up there on a mountain, 12,000 foot up in Siberia. He's not on the internet. You know,
Yeah.
how does he know about the Bushmen? We're back to that collective consciousness field. A lot of shamans know each other and communicate with each other through this field, it turns out. And I don't know if you followed that really good NPR thing, the telepathy tapes, a couple
Mhm.
of years ago, where they were basically finding that many people who are nonverbal autistic seem to communicate within a common field, almost like a kind of chat room that they call the hill.
Yeah.
That's on, and that there was all sorts of pushback online about this, and then all sorts of other pushback from autistic people saying, I go there, I go there, I go there, right? And so, yeah, how would he even know? But
Right.
he knew. And so, what he said to me after the 3 days of healings that we did with him, and that was great because he said, "Oh yeah, you guys can film the healings, but your equipment will probably shut down because the spirit activity will be too great," and that's exactly what happened. Um, he said afterwards, "Okay, this has worked. You're going to find that the stuff that really drives you crazy, the incontinence, the tantruming, the inability to make friends, really, this is going to get kind of seriously better like now." And I was really intrigued by that because normally shamans are a little bit more equivocal. They're a little bit more hedge your bets. I mean, even physicians are. They're like, well, we expect the symptoms to, and if it doesn't work, come back in. Da, 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 no one says it's going to happen like this. And certainly, it's quite rare in the shamanic thing. So I was quite surprised that he went out on a limb like that. Yet, 27 hours after we came down that mountain, Rowan did his first intentional poo, and we happened to get it on camera, and cleaned himself. I mean, this was like
Wow.
watching England win the World Cup, right? Which will probably never happen, but this did happen. And and if I had to choose between one or the other, I know which one I'd choose. I'd like both, though. Can I have
Yeah.
both, please? Okay. So at least within my lifetime. So the the thing he also said though was, um, in order for this healing to confirm itself to be fixed, if you like, and this is quite normal actually for them to say, is you need to do it again every year for about 3 years. And he said, I know that coming here is impossibly difficult. I know what it costs you guys mentally, physically, financially, everything to get up this mountain to me where you cannot access other than foot or horse after days, if not weeks of, you know. But he said, you have this connection with the Bushmen. He said, as you said, they are very, very powerful, more powerful than us. Take him there. And then wherever else you can. So I actually did that, the successive series, and I wrote another book, Plug's book. The book, Plug's sequel to the Horseboy Rides Again. But I wrote a second book called The Long Ride Home, which follows those three other journeys, those three other shamanic journeys. First to the Bushmen, and then to Australia, actually, in the Daintree rainforest in Queensland with the Kuku Yalanji Aboriginal tribe, who did amazing healings with Rowan, and where I saw something that flat out blew my mind, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And then to the Navajo reservation, where beautiful healing happened. And it was after that final one, that was 2010, he really became properly conversational like that day. He'd been
Wow.
he was verbal, more and more verbal, but very scripted. And then it was like, Dad, do you want a cup of coffee? Who are you? Like
Wow.
hours after that healing. So that when you engage with that sort of shamanic healing, often it does take more than one shot. You kind of need to go back at least every 18 months for a while, and then you can kind of coast for a bit, and then you start knowing when you need one. So I have had them, periodically through my life. I know I'm probably due about now. Rowan knows he's due. We had that conversation. He's 25 now.
Wow.
And we're planning, okay, where's it going to be? Where are we going to go? Where's the next one going to be? Is it Africa? Is it going to be somewhere else? And we're just throwing it out there to the universe to see what comes. He has now gone through sweat lodges, which I never thought he'd be able to do, with the sensory
Yeah.
issues. And he lives within the shamanic sphere, because
Well,
when
that's what I
you
was going to ask, because that's what one of the shamans, I think it was Ghost, or maybe it was more than just him, but said this is within him and he might develop in this way. And Ghost, I think it was, had also been autistic as a child.
well, this is it. In fact, we in the Horseboy documentary, you'll notice we have some talking heads helping people understand the story. One of them is Dr. Temple Grandin. Another one is a man called Dr. Richard Grinker, who is an ethno anthropologist who specializes in looking at shamanism. And Really interesting guy, and he makes a really good point. He says when you go into areas of the world where the shamanic tradition is very strong, what you'll notice is that the people who are the healers are almost always exhibiting neuropsychiatric symptoms of one form or another, whether adult autism or schizophrenia or epilepsy or some sort of real bipolar or something, some cocktail of all these things. And they're often going in and out sometimes of psychosis. And this is regarded as a job qualification rather than an exclusion or a
Mm.
danger to their society. The idea is that they have such spiritual and emotional sensitivity that like their instrumentation for that is so finely tuned that they effectively already have one foot in the spirit world and in the collective field of consciousness and access it very, very directly. And then they are usually targeted for training in how to kind of formalize it and coalesce it at adolescence. It usually kicks in with puberty. And then they have to do all the other things that the tribe does as well. They don't like immediately go into like some sort of monastic thing. No. But there comes a point where after being a sort of assistant really for many, many years, they kind of step into it. And they usually step into it somewhere in their 30s. And then they still have to have a parallel normal life. They don't become like sort of subsidized shamans where the tribe actually looks after them and provides them with food until they usually hit about their 60s when they kind of really hit their stride. And then the last 20, 30 years of their life, that's really all they do. Um, and so these people usually are very neurodivergent. And
Mm.
what's so ghost absolutely autistic. The healer that I was always closest to, who I haven't talked about yet, was a man called Besa in Botswana, and he's in all three of those books that I wrote. So he's in the Healing Land. He's responsible for the shamanic side of the political success that we had in the courts, because there was a point where we realized that the lawyers that we had hired were going in and briefing the community. The community were then going and talking with the shamans. The shamans were then going into the spirit world and coming back with a set of instructions, which they would give to the community, who would then give that to the lawyers. And we were
Interesting.
knocking it out of the park every time. And I realized we couldn't let the lawyers know that this was what was going on, because these were people like doing pro bono work coming in from like Washington, D.C. and stuff. And they just wouldn't have been on the top of their game if they thought that something so irrational was, happening. But nonetheless, largest land claims in African history got won more than once. Okay, against all odds. So yeah, the interplay of rational with irrational, neurodivergent with neurotypical goes back to the dawn of what it means to be a human being. And if you are living in this very high stakes environment called the wilderness, where if you make bum decisions, you die like really fast, and including the biggest bum decision of all is conflict. What you find, because it's fragmentation of community, everyone dies. So what you find is they're not agricultural, they don't create surpluses, they're not herding livestock, but the quality of life is so high. And what you see is that the baseline human state when you hang out with these people is happiness. Not euphoric, quiet, humorous enjoyment of life. Gratitude, not taking things seriously at all. They take the piss out of each other so much. I'll tell you. So Besa, anyway, totally autistic, this guy. When I finally tracked him down, I'd heard about him and I'd heard about him and I'd heard about him. I found him eventually under a tree in Western Botswana, remote part of Western Botswana. And I got out of the Land Rover. I'd spent 2 years trying to track this dude down. So I'd heard so many stories about him and shape-shifting, particularly shifting into leopard. shape-shifting into leopard. I'm like, what does that even mean? I want to go find out what that means. And I did observe him shape-shifting into a leopard eventually. Of course, at first he pretended, I don't know what that means. We don't do that. But then when we built relationship, he's like, okay, fine, I'll show you, and I won't leave you guys hanging. I'll talk to you about that in a moment. But when he saw me come out of the car, he didn't know me. He stood up, he went, you, there are two besas, two besas. And he starts dancing around it. Two besas, o besa, old besa. He's speaking in Afrikaans, which is a sort of lingua franca, that old form of colonial Dutch, because I'm not speaking Basawa, which is his Bushman language. He's not speaking English. He's in Afrikaans. O besa, klein besa, little besa, that's you, that's me. And ever since, from that point on, I was known as Little Besa. And Rowan's middle name is Besa. Besa showed me so much. And he was one of the 3 healers who healed my son in Botswana. Actually, we had to get him out of Botswana into Namibia because I'm banned from Botswana. I can't go into Botswana anymore because of my human rights work. So we had to find this bloke who lives under a tree a passport and get him over the border into Namibia, the neighboring country, to do the healing with my son. Yet we kind of managed to figure that out. And crazy stuff. He is so autistic. I would say that in my decades of knowing him, I never had a conversation with him. It was always in riddles and little snatches of song and strange. He would flap, he would stim, but people would come from thousands of miles to be healed by him. And I watched him like pull cancers out of people and pull rheumatoid arthritis out of people's legs. And okay, so what does it mean to turn into a leopard? So there are certain people who will, certain shamans who will gravitate to certain animals for certain things. So he would say sometimes for healing, he would go as a bird, and he'd go into the spirit world as a bird, and he'd find the soul of the sick one lying down, and he'd light on their back and he'd sing the sickness out of them. But he said sometimes it was stronger than that, and you needed to confront perhaps evil intent, and you'd have to find the spirit or the soul of the person who'd done the ill wishing and kind of get them to admit it. And in their admission, the bad work would be undone. And sometimes for this, you needed a stronger animal like lion or leopard. And one time, after knowing him for some years, I did observe him do it. And what happened was, instead of a normal healing ceremony, which has the whole village or the whole community there, creating a polyphonic chant with hand clapping and such, and the shaman, male or female, dances themselves into trance, because in the Kalahari there are no psychotropic plants, there's no ayahuasca, there's no magic mushrooms, there's nothing like that grows. It all has to be done through trance, and they basically boil their cerebral spinal fluid in their stomachs. They call it life force, and this is the force that they use. People might also call it ki, chi, or kundalini, but you'll hear yoga people say, oh, I activated my kundalini. It's like, did you really? Like, go to the Kalahari and I'll show you people that can do that. But maybe you did a little bit, okay, but not like this. Anyhow, this was completely different. It was just private, him and his wife and his son, and he danced himself into trance, and then he fell unconscious, and a leopard came out of the bush about 20 feet away. And this doesn't happen. You don't see leopards like this. Leopards are incredibly shy. People who've spent all their lives in Africa have maybe seen one 3 times. They don't like come out of the bush and like walk up to where you are.
Yeah.
No,
I've been in safari in Kenya and in South Africa, and we saw a leopard in both of them, and it was a huge deal.
Yes,
Really big
it's a
deal,
huge
even on
deal.
a safari. Yeah.
It's like in America, there's cougars around, but how many times do people see cougars? It's
Right.
relatively rare. They're shy. They stay. Anyway, leopard appears, comes out, looks at us, and then goes off. And then that's him inside the leopard. And then the job of the family is now to stay with him, probably for about 12 hours, until the leopard comes back and he comes back into his body, having achieved whatever healing journey he needed to achieve that way. And that is shape-shifting. But there are other ways of shape-shifting too. Like there's a way of hunting, for example, where you have to become the animal. And then people will do it through running. They run themselves into a trance and they become the animal. But that's something you do only in extreme situations, because it requires such high physical cost that people will do it when they're facing starvation. And only certain people can do it. And it's a special kind of hunting magic. I've seen other types of hunting magic happen where the animal is called to you, to make the shot, the bow shot, because the bows are very small. They don't have a big range. One could go on. How did people figure out what ayahuasca was in those 8 bazillion plants that grow in the Amazon? Trial and error to know that this vine plus this vine for this length of time, and it will kill you if you don't. Yeah, right. Come on. Or
Right.
the relationship with fungi. We're gonna like try each one and just see who dies. No. So you have to be able to go into a state of consciousness where you can talk to the plant, where you can talk to the animal. And some people are going to roll their eyes at that. Knock yourself out with your eye rolling. These cultures have been doing it for a long time. They will still be doing it after you finish rolling your eyes. More interesting is to find out, to ask the question, how do they do it? Why do they do it? How did it evolve? Do we have more capacity this way than we think we do? Isn't that kind of interesting? Is that the realm of the unreal? No, it appears to be the realm of the real. Is that the realm of the supernatural? Yes. Super does not mean not. It just means bigger, more. So supernatural simply means the natural world, kind of on a scale that appears miraculous, that we don't quite understand yet. But we do know, for example, there are frequencies of light we can't see, there are frequencies of sound we can't hear, but other animals, other beings, etc., do operate through those. We can't see it happen, so we don't know why that elephant suddenly goes over there, but he heard a frequency that we couldn't hear. There are things going on that we don't have the perception for, but there are certain ways that we can expand our perception, and some of these spiritual technologies are that. So I also said that in Australia we saw something that blew our minds, so I should probably refer to that too.
Yes,
Um,
please.
when that healing was happening, it's very low key. Shamanic healings, by the way, are usually very low key. Occasionally there's like thundering drums and being whipped or something. But let's say I was really surprised by that one, because normally they're a bit more low key. And the very nice Kuki-Yalanji shaman who took us on put Rowan in a chair. It's outside in the forest, in the rainforest, and he created a certain kind of smoke from a certain plant, and he did a smoking ceremony. Smoked, right? He didn't roll Rowan up in papers and smoke him. He wafted smoke over him, and Rowan sat there going, "I feel better in my head. I feel better." It's really interesting. And over 3 days, he started, the shaman, just doing this up and down Rowan's spine just with his fingers. And this is actually something that you see a lot in shamanic ceremonies. If you look in the Horseboy movie, the documentary, you'll see ghosts doing that to Rowan, pulling stuff out and going in and out of trance while he does it. The Bushmen do it, and that's tied up with your cerebral spinal fluid and your life force. And I could go further into this, but let's just say it happens. And he's doing it, but he's wearing, it's very hot. He's wearing, I think he was just wearing like a singlet, like a tank top, and he's got a teacup like this sitting next to him. And he's just flicking his fingers every now and then into this teacup. So naturally, me and my ex, we kind of have to go, oh, I wonder what's going on in that teacup, right? So we look into the teacup and we're like, okay, how's this happening? The teacup is filling up with this kind of liquid gel that looks like kind of snot. When you like blow your nose and it's like really liquidy with like lots of little bloody bits in it, it's stringy bits of it's like that.
Wow.
And it's just like every time he flicks his fingers in there, there's a bit more, but there's nothing there's no sleight of hand. There's no way he can hide anything, or there's no theater going on. And he's not even asking us to look in there. We're looking in there, right? And then later, after that first day, I'm like, what's all that about? And he just goes, come back tomorrow. And we come back the next day, same thing, but the cup fills up about half as much. The third day, it fills up very, very little. And he just says, okay, he'll be fine. He's done. And
Wow.
that day, Rowan starts this whole um, relationship with maths and also theory of mind, where he starts really figuring out that you think something different to him. He plays his first practical joke on me, which is a whole cognition thing that he was not really there with
Tapping
yet.
into. Yeah.
But, you know, so what happened with these books, as you can imagine, is I got loads of pushback with people saying, well, are you saying that, shamanism cures autism then, or horses cure autism? I'm like, of course I'm not saying that. Of course I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I had a particular experience that involved horses and involved this kind of interaction with the universal consciousness that we found immensely helpful. But no, I don't mean that you have to therefore take your kid to Mongolia, but or put him on a horse. But what you might want to do is ask yourself, what is the spiritual journey that you might want to or need to undertake? When you take yourself to the doctor, it's a spiritual journey. It's actually a little bit of a pilgrimage. You don't go to the doctor for a laugh, do you? You don't like wake up in the morning, you know what, I'm a bit bored. I'm going to go to the doctor. Hey, shall we go to the doctor? You're like, yeah, it's a great idea. Let's go sit in the waiting room, and like thumb through magazines and wait to be seen. And no, you don't do that, do you? You only do it when you have a dilemma that you need addressing. But you move your AS to that place, go through a story, you consult with the physician. The physician goes, and then he or she consults with their knowledge base, comes back with a series of instructions. Off you go. It's just that you might, when the dilemma in front of you is perhaps a little bit greater than a physician can address, and any physician would say, this kind of autism is frankly outside of our ken, then you're going to have to look for things that are the next level up. But what that is to you is going to be very personal to your life. So what's the point of a book like The Horse Boy or The Long Ride Home? It just makes the point that such journeys and such undertakings are worthwhile. But it doesn't have to be that far. Many people are going to Mongolia in their own living rooms every day, facing crises and there's all sorts of internal journeys to make. The way that the journey, the pilgrimage, whatever you want to call it, the quest, uh, manifests for you is personal to you. And it may not mean leaving your room. You might take a voyage around your living room in a way that is deeply spiritual. Many people have epiphanies without ever leaving their bed. But it's not going to happen unless you put your consciousness out there into the field and say, please help me, I need help. That's called prayer. And that's been working for people for a jolly long time. And again, you get the people who roll their eyes. And again, I say, knock yourself out with the eye rolling. People were praying before you rolled your eyes. People will pray long after you rolled your eyes. And I bet you, Mr. or Miss Eye Roller, that when shit hits the fan in your life, you'll probably pray because it's the logical thing to do. And what you're praying for is help, praying for love. And God or the consciousness or whatever doesn't go, well, you didn't pray until now, so I'm not gonna. That's not how it works. At the moment you ask, boom, help comes. It's the knock and it is given. That's the sort of New Testament. And then people say, oh, Rupert, you're talking Christianity now. I thought you were talking, shamanism. Well, come on, it's all universal love. It's all the field of human consciousness. You can put this name on it, you can put that name on it. You know where you're coming from. If you're doing Christianity with the Spanish Inquisition, well, it's probably not quite what Christ had in mind. If you're If you're a shaman of Genghis Khan's Mongols and you're doing kind of battle magic and impaling people, well, that's probably not what the greater consciousness really had in mind. And you yourself might end up destroying yourself through that thing. It really doesn't matter how you interact with this, and whether you think you're interacting with it or not, you're interacting with it. Simply by being a human being alive on planet Earth and breathing oxygen, you are interacting with the collective consciousness, which kind of is God, which kind of is love. And, one can argue about it, but why argue? Why not just experience it and discuss your experience versus my experience so that we can then have a greater experience, get inspired by each other, so that when you or I end up facing a dilemma that is beyond the immediate set of resources, we can know what to do. So rather interestingly, since we started running our organization, I could explain all the neuroscience behind now why Rowan spoke and on the horse. And there is neuroscience on this, and I because I started doing it with other kids and I started getting the same reaction. So I went to neuroscientists, like I went to Temple Grandin and said, please explain. And I got the same explanation. And now our organization is asked to run a biannual neuroscience conference at Eastern Virginia Medical School because the neuroscience behind what we do is so sound. Doesn't mean that there isn't spirituality as well. It's the same thing, right? But Dr. Megan McGavin of Riverside Medical Group, big physicians group shout out to Megan, in Eastern Virginia there. She's an autism mum. She came and started working with us, got an amazing result with her kid, got into the science behind it, but she's also very spiritual. She's the one who then got asked by this university to put the thing on. Um, a lot of the people that actually we work with are doctors, and a lot of the people we
Wow.
work with are neuroscientists. So good scientists have no problem with any of this. And I'll give you a really interesting example of this. My uncle, my own uncle in my family, my dad's brother, um, he's retired now, but he was an eminent uh, pathologist at University College Hospital in London, which is that's like Johns Hopkins, right? And by the way, Johns Hopkins has a shaman that comes on the children's ward. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. Wow.
Would love to have been at that meeting. Can you imagine that board meeting? Item number 30, the shaman to come. This stuff goes on. When I want to find a
Amazing.
shaman in a place I don't know, I contact hospitals. I contact regional hospitals in tribal
Wow.
areas, and I'll say it's how I found the guy in Australia. And I'll say, is there a funny old man or a funny old woman who comes on the ward and like shakes feathers over people? And they're
Wow.
like, actually, yeah, there is. And like, does it seem to work? And they're like, well, they seem to, yeah, actually. So we let this person come in a lot because they seem to vacate the beds quicker, And then I say, have you got the name of that person? And then I'll contact that person. So again, it's always this interplay between rational and irrational. So anyway, my uncle, pathologist, research pathologist, very rational, very dry, not at all averse to telling you if he thinks you're full of poo, and takes great delight in it, in fact. So when the documentary was made of the horse boy, we had a family screening at a private cinema in London, and he was there, and I thought, oh, he's going to take a huge poo all over me at the end of this, right? So I'm just getting ready for it, and I'm a hippie nephew, okay. And so at the end, I go up to him and I open an imaginary umbrella, and I go, all right, surf's up, do your worst, lift your leg, let me have both barrels. And he says, actually, Rupert, today I'm not going to SHIT. And I said, that's unlike you. Why? This is a perfect opportunity. How can you pass it up? And he said, well, two things. Remember, this is almost 20 years ago that the thing came out. He said, first off, you're saying that autism might have gifts. That's actually kind of interesting to me as a scientist. The second thing is I think you're putting your finger on an interesting understanding of the placebo effect. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Rupert, most people misunderstand the placebo effect profoundly. meaning that they will dismiss something because they think it's the placebo effect. Oh, it's just the placebo effect. He said that means they completely misunderstand what the placebo effect is and does. He said, I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, okay, Rupert, when you feel sick and you go to the doctor and you get a prescription and you go to the pharmacy and you buy that drug, how do you think that drug came on the market? I said, well, a drug trial. He said, yes. He said, who's in that drug trial? I said, well, people who get the drug and people who get a placebo. And he goes, yes, Rupert. What they don't tell you is that before that drug is allowed to come on the market, it has to consistently make more people better than the placebo. And usually the drug has to go through several rounds before it achieves this. And he said, Rupert, the people that get the placebo don't just think they get better and then go off and die. They get better. We don't know why, but this is the truth. So when you go and buy that drug, it has had to go through that process. For quite a while, more people got better on the placebo. The entire pharmaceutical industry, the entire allopathic medical industry rests upon this very, very irrational foundation. This is him talking to me. He says people just
Right.
don't think about this. And yes, of course, the drugs also are, compounds of medicinal plants from the Amazon or Africa or whatever. They've been used by shamans for that. Because there's also a whole sort of plant medicine within shamanic stuff. It's not just trance and all of that. There's also really practical pharmacology as well. Again, rational and irrational. But he said, is it possible that what these shamans are doing is harnessing this placebo effect in a really conscious and deliberate way that with training they can be really effective? And he said that's interesting to me as a scientist. And he said, honestly, perhaps probably one day the science will catch up with it, but just not now. So keep making those films.
Wow.
Yeah, so coming from him, I'm always
Huge
disappointed.
win.
I was like, dude, okay, well, I guess I put the umbrella away. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, I was all ready to defend myself or to just take the onslaught. I
Totally.
love it. Wow. Well, you're just amazing. You're delightful. I have learned so much today. And again, just really, it just thoroughly enjoyed your book and your story. Um, I want to be respectful of your time, and please come back because I think that there are so many. We hardly talked about the 17th century, and I really feel like
We didn't even
there were
sing.
a
We were going to
we
sing,
didn't
and
we didn't sing. There was no Middle Earth stuff that made it into the recording, so we have a lot of unfinished business. But but please tell people how they can learn more about your work
right.
and Horseboy and so forth.
Okay. So obviously, if you just want to read the book and watch the documentary, that's The Horse Boy book and doc. You can find the doc on YouTube, I think, actually. And the book, well, obviously, they sell books on internet. You buy the book. And there's a follow-up called The Long Ride Home, which I would recommend because it puts the whole thing in context, because it takes Rowan through the next few years. Um, by the way, I should probably say how Rowan's doing. He's
Yes,
25,
please.
right, and he is living pretty much independently. In fact, he even sold his house last year. He drives. He has two volunteer jobs. He also works with me, doing trainings for autism parents, helping to understand the experience from the inside and that sort of thing. He's amazing. He's still very autistic, and he's like really functional. When I went to
Mm.
Temple Grant, said, "How's my son become you?" Kind of happened. So
Oh,
that's Rowan. He's incredible and just a light being. He actually has to walk into the room and people are on their best game. He just
wow.
brings that out in people. He's just pure love. Um, okay, and he's funny too. Um, so okay, the work we do. If you want to know the three therapeutic um, programs that we have, and we didn't even go into the neuroscience of why they work. Let me do it quickly. When Rowan was on the horse and the horse was in a soft, collected rhythm, which is how I used to ride with him, it rocks the pelvis in a way that
Oh,
makes your body produce oxytocin. And oxytocin is not just a feel-good bliss hormone that calms your nervous system, which of course in his case is oversensitive, and tells the amygdala, the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain that's telling your body to produce cortisol, stress hormone, tells that to calm down now. But it's also the hormone of communication. It makes you communicate. So if you have autoism, auto is the Greek word for the self. Autoism, selfism, locked in the self. Difficulty is the relationship with the exterior world. Oxytocin is going to help with this a lot. And then through all of the exploration in nature, these kinds of movements make your brain produce a protein, special protein, which has a 4-letter acronym. This was all explained to me by the neuroscientists that I went and consulted with. I didn't come out of my mother's womb knowing this stuff. And this protein has a 4-letter acronym, BDNF. Brain derived, made in the brain, neurotrophic, growing of brain cells, factor effect. That's neuroplasticity. So you effectively grow a new brain. And that's why you mustn't lead a sedentary lifestyle, I'm afraid. And that's why if you put old people in old people parking, which we do in our culture, stupid idea, the brain dies. And it's why if kids are too much on devices, they're not moving enough. Their brains don't develop properly. We're supposed to be moving all the time through nature, through natural environment. Okay. And anyway, so you can't separate learning from movement, which is why school often doesn't work. So we have something called horseboy method and something called movement method, which produce this. And when you're exploding with all these neurons, this BDNF, there are some specific neurons in your cerebellum that fire called Purkinje cells. It sounds like a Pokemon character. Purkinje. But it's actually named after a Czech scientist called Purkinje who discovered them. And they govern, among many other things, they do many things, they govern social skills. So you're filling somebody with communication hormone, calm down your nervous system hormone, and social skills, brain cells, you're going to see change. So we have a program called Horseboy Method, where we do that as an equine assisted therapy. We have a program called Movement Method. And so Movement Method does it without horses. And we show people how to do that in the home, in schools, with themselves, with any population. And then we have something called Taquine Equine Integration, which is how you prepare the horse to work with that young child as its own therapy. And we do that with adults with trauma, adults with autism, etc., etc. And we basically get the same result each time. If you want to know more about these, if you want to take the courses that we offer, we work about 40 countries and we serve about 300,000 families doing this. Not me personally, people that we have trained. Okay. And it works. So if you want to know more, newtrailslearning.com. We also have a not-for-profit, which we can subsidize low-income families to have these services and so on. If you want to make a donation, that's always great. horseboyfoundation.org. O-R-G. And if you want to contact me, there's email links, and we will always help. If you're a neurodivergent and suffering, or a parent not wondering what to do, or a school that wants to put this kind of approach into, we've got our people in Movement Method right now in Germany, as I speak to you, making big presentations at this big conference, education conference right now, working in the German school system. There's been a PhD in America done into our work in the German schools, and blah, 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 blah. There's lots of science behind it. If you want to get in contact, just newtrailslearning.com, horseboyfoundation.org. Contact us through there. We'll sort you out.
Wow. Well, Rupert, this has just been amazing. I've learned so much, and I've just had so much fun with you. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all of the ways that you are contributing to humanity in so many ways, and to the spirit. And it's really just been an honor to be with you today.
Well, to you too, thank you for that. And thank you for giving us an opportunity to, platform. More people need to know about it, because there's so many families out there who are in the position that we were, wondering, oh my gosh, what do I do? Well, it's people like you asking people like me to come on podcasts like this. By the way, one last plug, I have my own podcast. Go to equineassistedworld.com. or livefreeridefree.com. I've actually got 2 podcasts.
Oh.
And have a look at some of the people on those who are dealing with nature and the mind. A lot of those people are doing amazing work too. So, thank you for having me. It's been a great honor, and thank you for letting me blather on.
Oh, it's been amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay, till the next time.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Soul Elevation. If someone in your life would be inspired by what you heard today, please take a moment to share it with them. These conversations ripple out and elevate collective consciousness. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the powerful episodes ahead. Your presence, energy, and support truly help amplify this mission of raising frequency and anchoring in a more awakened humanity. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you for the next episode of Soul Elevation.